So are you team overalls or team overall dress? Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be working on two patterns. One of them is a overall pattern and then one of them is a dress expansion pattern. So the first pattern that I'm going to be making is the overall pattern from Charm Patterns, her Make, Do, and Mend overalls. And for that one, I am going to be using this purple linen that I dyed myself. I had to be very specific about how I was going to use this linen because I don't know if you guys can see it. I think it might show up on camera. This was very splotchy. This area of the linen was very splotchy, and so I had to avoid, there was some on one side and some on the other side, and I had to avoid that when I was cutting the pattern pieces because for whatever reason it didn't dye it completely evenly. It kind of I think it was because I didn't mix it enough, to be totally honest with you. So there was that. This is what I have left over right now. And then the other pattern that I'm going to be doing after I do the overalls is this dress expansion for the same pattern. So the bodice is the same, but it has a dress expansion. And I really like the style of this dress, and that's why I really wanted to do it, because I think while I really like the overalls and I like the idea of overalls, the problem that I'm going to have with those is that it has a side button closure and it's very difficult to get on and off in a hurry. So if you really need to use the bathroom, you're going to be in trouble. However, I do still like it and I want to wear it, and I think that it's really cute. It's just not conducive to everyday wear. The dress pattern I'm going to be making in this white cotton shirting that I got from Joann Fabrics, and I'm going to be fully lining it. So the pattern only calls for lining of the bodice, and that was what I did in the overalls because that fabric is totally fine and it is not sheer. But this is pretty see-through, and so I didn't want to do this in just one layer on the dress and have to worry about wearing a slip underneath it, because that's not conducive to something that I would actually wear. If this is supposed to be like a workwear type of thing, having to wear a slip or some sort of a undergarment to cover up, that's not realistic for me. So I'm going to be lining it with this cotton sheet that I bought a while back and that I also used for the lining of the overalls. So it's the same thing. So I'm super excited to get into it. As part of this project, I actually think I started this project and the overalls in like February, March timeframe. It's kind of what I had wanted to do during that time, and what I was doing with like the magic pants and some of the other pants patterns that I made was trying to use up as much stuff in my stash as I could. And so that's why I decided to use this linen and this shirting, because they were both items that were in my stash and that I could easily repurpose for whatever I needed them for. I'm not really sure what I had originally intended to buy them for, but this is what I'm using it for. The linen I dyed myself, like I said, and I dyed it in this purple color. However, it didn't come out as good as I wanted it to. So on video, I think it reads more like denim, but it is not. This is actually linen fabric that, like I said, I dyed. For some reason, when I was editing the video, I could see that it looks more blue on film. However, it is more of a purple color. So with that, let's get started with cutting out my fabric. So here you can see I'm cutting out my fabric, and I had to be very specific, like I mentioned in the introduction, in order to make sure that I was not getting any splotchy pieces on the fabric, on the pattern pieces that I was cutting out. So I had to avoid certain areas. Most of it was at the beginning of the fabric and then at the end of the fabric. For whatever reason, maybe I just wasn't mixing it enough. That's my theory, because when I re-dyed, or when I dyed the fabric for my boyfriend's undershirt for the cosplay, that stuff actually came out really good. And I made a conscious effort to be, mixing it really well, taking it out, putting it back in, making sure that all of the fabric came in contact with the dye so that it would dye more evenly. I was not aware that that was something that I was going to have to do with this fabric, because this was only the second or third time that I've dyed fabric. And this was also a very dark color. So it just didn't come out as good. So once all the fabric was cut out, I stitched together both the waist darts and the bust darts on both the fashion fabric and the lining. Here I am sewing together one short side of the strap and both long sides of the strap. When I do this, sometimes I notice that some of the fabric becomes a little bit stretched out. I don't know if you guys have this problem, and maybe it's the presser foot tension. I tried to mess with that on the new machine and the dress version. The overalls pattern. I did this on my old machine, which doesn't have quite as many settings and options as the Bernina does. So I can't really tell you if that made much of a difference, but I was messing with it and trying to see if the tension on the presser foot or the pressure on the presser foot was helping. Here I'm attaching the facing on the lining portion of the bodice, and this serves as a stabilizer for the buttonholes because this is where you're going to make buttonholes through in the bodice portion of this dress or overalls. So here I am sewing the elastic channel that is going to be at the top of the shearing panel in the back. And then I do the shearing. And in this portion of the video, you can tell that I am not doing the shearing properly because I did not put the tension in my machine correctly on this particular machine. And I had to do some research to figure it out because I had never done shearing before. So that was pretty exciting. And then on my new machine, on the Bernina, it was actually much, much easier because threading the bobbin is actually much easier in that machine. And so the tension was not an issue. It was actually too much tension, I think. And I think that I needed to increase the stitch length on that one in order to account for that. But here you can see that it's not bunching up at all in this part of the video. So I ended up having to cut out a whole new piece. Luckily, I still had some fabric left over and redo it after watching a couple of videos on how to make sure that the bobbin thread was in there correctly because it had to go in a specific way in order to catch the tension, in order for the tension to be correct on the bobbin, and in order for it to pull on the shearing and make it do what it's supposed to. So here you can see that it's actually pulling on the thread tension correctly, and it's starting to scrunch up that portion of the panel. And this was after some trial and error and trying to figure out why it wasn't working properly. It doesn't do as good a job as the Bernina does, but it's still adequate. And I guess if you mess with the thread tension in the bobbin thread tension, you might actually be able to make it a little bit better on this machine. However, that wasn't something I wanted to do because trying to figure out how to fix that afterwards and putting it back to the correct tension is kind of a big pain in the butt. So I was happy with how this one came out, and then you will see that it shrinks up even more once you steam it. It came out pretty good for this project. Here we have our little nightmare visitor who decided that he was going to lay right on top of all the pattern pieces that I need. So, convenient. So here I am attempting to make this piece shrink down a little bit more. And in order to do that, what you do is you put your iron on steam and you hover it over the piece of fabric that you're using. So you don't want to obviously melt the thread because the thread is just made of plastic. So you're just going to try to steam it and you're just going to hover it over the fabric and see if you can get it to shrink down a little bit more. I mean, you get the idea here, but my iron is totally and completely in the way of this shot. So here I am stitching around the smaller curved area of the pocket piece. And then after I stitch those pieces together, you want to make sure that you understitch, but you want to make sure that you're understitching the pieces opposite. So, because one goes on your right side and one goes on your left side. And if you understitch them both exactly the same, then you will have two of the exact same pockets. And then you have to unpick the stitches and redo them so that they're on opposite legs. And I think that the first time I did this, I actually did do two of the same ones. And I don't recall if I decided to unpick it or if I just decided to leave it because that was too much work. So here I think I decided to top stitch around the pocket opening on here because I think that what happened was that I did in fact do the understitching the same way on both sides, and I had already trimmed the seam allowance down, and so I just wanted it to make it look like I did that on purpose. And then the next part is to top stitch or edge stitch these pocket pieces into place around the outside of the pants, the front of the pants. And this I did with my blind hem foot because it helps you to keep the same distance on both sides, and it made it look much better. So I did the same thing. When I was doing it with the dress though, I used my edge stitch foot that comes with my Bernina, or didn't come with it, but I purchased it with the Bernina.
The whole like
Hi,
my recordings.
I'm gonna try. I don't know if he's gonna like jump ship or not. Hi, oh, he's a good boy. Good boy.
What is
Oh, he's
that?
a good boy. You gonna sniff it? Where you going? No. So that little cutie was Wolverine, and he had just come to say hello, but I guess he's a little bit camera shy because as soon as I turned the camera on him, he just wanted to leave. And then the next step was to just baste it along the top and the side seams. So here I'm attaching the left hip facing, and that again is to stabilize the buttonholes that you're going to later put in this piece. And also you put the snaps in here, and this is just on the left side, the front of the pants. And then again, you understitch that piece so that it will make sure that it stays to the back of the fabric of the pants. And then after that, you just baste across the top to hold it in place as well. And then the next part is to make all of the back pockets, because this one on the pants, you have two back pockets, and these ones are made in the same way as both of the other types of pockets, the front pocket pieces and the pocket piece on the front of the bodice. You put them right sides together and then you turn them out and then you top stitch them on or edge stitch them in place. So here I actually am edge stitching those pockets into place, and this I found that this blind hem foot actually helped quite a bit to make sure that all of my stitches were evenly spaced and from the side, that is, and it made it look so much more professional and so much better. So I do recommend that if you are putting on like patch pockets on something, that you make sure that you either use an edge stitch foot or blind hem foot to keep it all aligned, because it makes a huge difference in how it looks at the end. And I was trying to show it there, but my camera is completely out of frame. So the next step in the process is to sew together the right side seam on the right pant leg as worn, and then you do the inseam to create that leg. And then I believe after that, you do the same thing on the left inseam. And the reason why you don't want to do the left side, and that's like the last thing that you do, is because that's where all the buttons are, and the button placket is contained on the left side. And that's how you get the pants on and off. It was a little bit confusing, but her video definitely walks you through it step by step, which is why I kind of like her patterns, because even if her instructions are a little bit confusing, you can always reference the video. So here I am sewing together that crotch seam, and it goes from the center front of the pants all the way to the center back of the pants. And it's a little bit hard to tell because of how my camera angle is and how much fabric there is here, but that is what I'm doing here. So the next part is to sew together the bodice and the pants at the waist seam, and you're doing that everywhere except for on the shirring panel, because on the shirring panel you're going to connect those two using some elastic thread, because it does have a little bit of a bigger part there so that it can kind of scrunch down and make it so that it has a little bit of a stretchy waistband. And I do like the fact that she does that because otherwise I would be afraid that trying to put it on and off might be a little bit difficult. So here's where I'm attaching that shearing panel, and I am making sure to stretch out the shearing panel while I am sewing the pants onto it so that it has that nice stretch to it, and so you can have the elastic thread in there. And you're using the elastic thread in this part as well. The next part is to create that button guard, and that is going to go on the left side of the bodice and left side of the pants in order to have a place to put the buttons. And so now I'm attaching it in place. And so here I am sewing up that left pant leg to the side seam in order to enclose all of those raw edges and to enclose the button placket, the button guard, all of those pieces there. And I chose to put the snaps in, even though in her video she says that they are probably unnecessary. I did choose to put them in at first and see if I needed them or not, because when I did try it on initially after sewing up this side seam, I didn't know if I was going to need them. So I did just go ahead and sew to where she marks on the pattern, but she does say that you don't necessarily need it. You don't necessarily need to have the snaps there. It doesn't need to open that wide, but I just wanted to try it out first. And then the next step is to attach the lining to the bodice. And that's what I'm doing here and making sure that I am doing it at exactly the right seam allowance here around the sharp points so that I can get a nice sharp point when I turn it. So once all of the lining pieces are attached to the bodice, you just want to go in and understitch as much as you can and then trim back some of that seam allowance so that everything lays nice and flat and stays on the inside. And that's what I'm doing here. So once all of the lining pieces are attached, the next part is to make sure that you hand stitch everything into place. So there's lots and lots of hand sewing here. And then after that, you do your buttons and your buttonholes, and your project is complete once you've hemmed it, obviously. So I think the next part of the video is going to be the reveal. However, when I first tried it on, the legs were slightly too wide for me, and you will see that that's the case in the video here once I get to that portion. But I ended up having to make them narrower in the video portion after the reveal. I said wider, but I would never want the pant legs to be any wider than they already were. So I ended up having to narrow them down and remove some of the fabric from the crotch seam because the crotch seam was just, there was too much fabric in there. Probably I needed to do a rise adjustment, but since I did not do a mock-up, there was no way for me to know until after the garment was complete. And then at that point, you can still make adjustments to it and take some fabric out of it, which was what I did. And you can see that in the final reveal, it does look really good. However, in order to get there, I did have to make some adjustments to the finished product. But here I'm just doing my hand stitching around all of these pieces to make sure that the lining is completely attached to the bodice. And the only way to really do that is to slip stitch it, and so making sure that it's invisible on the outside. You can stitch in the ditch, but I really just didn't want to do that. I don't always like the way that looks because sometimes you can still see it, and sometimes it's hard to line the fabric up perfectly on the inside. I feel like I have much more control when I'm doing a slip stitch like this on the inside. So here is the first finished product, and you can see there's some extra fabric in the crotch seam in this, and also the pant legs are really, really wide on me. And I believe in the next clip, I did make some adjustments to the width of the pants, so you can see that they're really big on me. And so in the next clip, I believe I had lessened the wideness of the legs on this, and then after that, I went in and adjusted the crotch seam. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about this outfit or this pattern for just a minute. And talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. So I think it fits great. It's a good pattern. The only adjustments that I had to make was to make the leg a little bit wider, and I believe I showed the before and after in the reveal. And then I just had to take some out of the crotch rise. If I had done a mock-up, I would have known to take it out in the beginning, but I did not do a mock-up, so I just took it out at the end. And how I did that was I just take from side to side across the crotch, and I just took about like 1.5 inches out of it. And that seems to have worked. It fits much better. There's not as much extra fabric there as there was before, so that's good. The other thing that I did with this was that I didn't do the bigger cup size, and you can see I have some gaping here. So when I make the dress version of this, I'm definitely going to go to the bigger cup size because I do think that I need it. I went based off of my measurements, and my measurements on the size chart said that I was supposed to be doing a BC cup, whereas the last time I made one of her patterns, like the artist apron dress, I used the D double D, and I think it fit me much better. I didn't have any of this weird gaping here, and there was more room. I feel like I'm kind of being squished a little bit here, but like I said, that's my own fault. But I do like the shirring in the back. I think this is something that I've never done before, and I really like it. It was really easy, really simple to do, and she has video tutorials and step-by-step instructions that tell you exactly how to do it anyways. And like I said, it was really easy. My biggest problem with that was figuring out how to make sure that it was threaded correctly in my bobbin so that there was enough tension on it that it was actually pulling the shirring tight. And that was just me learning that. The first time I did it, it was all wrong. But I really like this pattern, and I'm excited to make it in the dress version. So let's go get started with that. So this is just the same thing that I did in the first portion of the video, except on a dress version, and I will just highlight where the differences were. So I'm not going to go through and tell you guys everything that I'm doing because I'm pretty sure you can tell that I'm just doing the bust darts here. And I did the same thing for the lining and for the waist darts, the bust darts. Everything is pretty much the same. The only differences are that this one has a skirt and it does not have pants. So off camera, because my camera just died, I put the straps on and I put the facing on the lining here. That's really all I did. Next step is going to be sewing the elastic channel on this back shirring piece and shirring. Shirring panel on this new machine that I just recently purchased, and you can see that it's already starting to scrunch up the shirring panel. So I'm not sure why it was doing so much better of a job, and I think that part of it was because I had the stitch length was a little bit too short. I needed to do like a longer stitch length in order to keep it from bunching up completely. But this machine did a much better job than the Brother machine did as far as the shirring panel was concerned. I really didn't even have to steam it at all because it was so stretchy. And you'll see that at the end when I finish it up. It's so tiny that I don't even need to steam it. It is so tight. I think this might be a problem, but we'll just see how it goes. So here I'm just attaching the two back panel pieces together on either side of the shirring, and this ended up not being a problem at all. It was not too small or anything like that. It was the perfect amount of stretchiness. So I'm really happy with the job that my new machine did, and it's definitely a much better machine than I'm used to. So here you can see that Nightmare has come to say hello, and at first I thought maybe he wanted some snuggles, but when I tried to hold him, he was just really not interested, so he ended up laying down on the ironing board that's on my table there. But first I'm giving him some scratches. It's because of his back, he can't really scratch his ear properly, so sometimes he needs us to scratch it for him, but he's adorable. Okay, so I think my camera shut off before it stopped recording. My card was full, but I have no idea where. So what I did, I don't know what I did. I was sewing the pockets together, so I sewed the top part of the pockets, and then I understitched, and now I'm sewing the bottom part of the pocket together, and then I'm going to flip it and get it onto the skirt. That's what I was doing. Okay, so let's go. So once you put the pockets onto the dress, you just attach that left hip facing again, and this is to support the buttons, just as it is in the pants. So here I think I am sewing together the right side seam on the skirt, and then I do the same thing with the lining. Once the lining and the skirt pieces are both assembled, I go ahead and baste them together along the waist seam so that when I go to put them together with the bodice, they're all just one piece. So here I'm attaching the bodice to the skirt at the waist seam, and this is done in the same way that I did it in the overalls. You do shirring thread in that shirring panel in order to attach it there, and then the other two pieces are attached normally. So here I'm attaching the button guard, and this is where the actual buttons are going to be sewn into once you complete the garment. The next step was to sew together that side seam on the left side and to make sure that you include some of that button placket, and she suggests that you leave out the snaps like I had said before, and since I had made the overalls and I knew that I didn't really need them, I did decide to leave them out this time. And then after I did the fashion fabric layer, I did the lining layer as well. So here I'm just attaching the lining to the bodice, and I am marking my seam allowance so that I can see exactly where I need to make those turns. And then after that, I'm going to be doing some understitching on the parts that I can reach. And then it will be time for lots and lots of hand sewing and buttons and buttonholes, which I did not record any of the hand sewing or the buttons and the buttonholes on this particular project. So next up, you will see the reveal. Okay, so let's quickly talk about this dress. I absolutely love how it came together. I love how it looks. There are just a few tweaks that I have to make because I just did some silly things when I was making it. I made the strap just a little bit too tight here, so I might have to take the buttonhole a little bit further down on the other side, might have to adjust where the buttonhole is. And then the only other thing that I did that I'm gonna have to fix is when I put these buttons in, I didn't remember that I was using shank buttons, and so it's pulling open a little bit, so I have to adjust the placement of the button over just a little bit more closer to the edge of the buttonhole where I want it to overlap, because right now it's a little bit too open. But other than that, I'm really liking the dress, the silhouette. It's comfortable. So after I make the adjustments to the straps and the button placket or the button placement on the dress, I think it's going to be a staple in my wardrobe that I'm going to love wearing and probably want to make again. So for that, I'm super excited. So are you team overalls or team overall dress? If you guys like my content, like and subscribe, and leave your comments in the comment section below on which team you are. Thank you so much for watching.